Shana Tova. As a child, I remember being terrified of AIDS. I was told not to drink and drive, and I remember Nancy Reagan telling us, say no to drugs. I was nervous when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, but I had just seen the Berlin Wall fall, and I felt that everything was going to be okay. I wasn't conscious of the issue of privilege, though I certainly understood that racism was present in our midst. I visited Israel for the first time at the tail end of the first Intifada in 1989, and again in the summer of 1993, when the euphoria of Oslo was about to hit the streets. Though, of course, I didn't know what would happen to Rabbi in 1995 at the hands of one of our own. And none of us knew that in 1999, when I was getting ready to graduate college and all of my friends were easily getting jobs, and the presidential crisis at that time was Bill Clinton's infidelity, none of us knew that in April, two boys were going to walk into a cafeteria in Columbine and kill their classmates and set off decades of school violence. And in 2000, the Second Intifada would again take center stage in Israel, killing and maiming thousands of Israelis and continuing cycles of violence that we cannot get out of. And none of us knew that in 2001 we would watch as towers and planes and buildings would crumble, and the innocence and naivete that we thought we would never be attacked here would go away, and that was just the beginning. We never would have imagined that we would be confronting measles again, or there would be an assault on women with anti-abortion laws. We would have challenges at our borders. And close to home, we see what is happening all around us. BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, is a direct threat to Israel if it's successful, and it is, in its purest form, anti-Semitism. Iran remains a threat for Israel, combined with the constant barrage of rockets from Gaza and terrorist attacks from the West Bank. But to be honest, despite that litany of horrible news that I just shared, the one constant that I always felt was safe as a Jew in America. I could never imagine that as a rabbi, I would have to comfort a community that had swastikas on the door, or the fear, the real fear that I have sometimes, standing on this pulpit, our pulpit, wondering, does somebody want to shoot me? When I was ordained in 2004, we talked about many issues at JTS. But trust me, rising anti-Semitism and guns in places that should literally be a sanctuary was not on our radar. I didn't think that Orthodox men would be attacked in Brooklyn, that synagogues would burn down in Minnesota, and we would have to ask, is someone going to come here? Never did I think that being a rabbi was a dangerous job. Never did I get as many emails as I do now asking about our security and wondering if words or silence stoke the flames of anti-Semitism that we see continuing on our soil from white supremacists. So all of this has led me to do a lot of thinking about anti-Semitism. Not only where it might come from and what it might mean for us, but the lessons that we must take from it. Professor Deborah Lipstadt wrote a fascinating book this past year about anti-Semitism, where she outlined categories of anti-Semites. First, she talked about the extremist in the street, the white nationalists of Charlottesville who chanted, "The Jews will not replace us," or the murderers in Pittsburgh or Poway. She wrote about the not-so-obvious anti-Semite as she recalled the story in Gentleman's Agreement when Gregory Peck's son comes home one day crying because some kids called him a dirty Jew and a stinking kike. Peck's non-Jewish girlfriend said, "Darling, it's not true. You're no more Jewish than I am. It's just a horrible mistake." As Deborah Lipstadt wrote, the girlfriend is not a Nazi and she has no resemblance to David Duke, but by telling the boy that he need not worry because he's in fact not a Jew, reinforces the degrading and hateful conceptions of Jews and the notion that there is something inherently wrong with being Jewish. Lipstadt refers also to the anti-Semitic enablers, those who refuse to condemn anti-Semitism, those who are linked to white supremacist organization. She writes, white nationalism went from being a conversation you could hold in a bathroom to a front parlor. And we see how anti-Semitism is expressed on the far left, trying to mask it as anti-Zionism, but we know this distinction doesn't exist. This is getting harder on campuses, and we are seeing a rise in discomfort for our college students. As an example, last week, a known anti-Semite, the president of Malaysia, was invited to speak at Columbia University as part of the World Leaders Forum. Brian Cohen, a friend and the executive director of the Columbia Barnard Hillel, issued the following statement: "I affirm the right to free speech on campus, but I question why the Prime Minister of Malaysia deserves a place on the dais in Low Library. This is an affront to Jewish students and anyone committed to equality and human dignity. The Prime Minister referred to Jews as hook-nosed, claims the number of Jews killed in the Holocaust is exaggerated, and took pride in being labeled an anti-Semite. The World Leaders Forum is an opportunity for students to learn from top leaders. Certainly, there are other more deserving of an invitation to address the Columbia University community." Brian writes, "I call on Columbia's administration to fully condemn the Prime Minister's hateful views and past remarks in his presence when he comes to campus." Sadly, this is what is taking place, and we need to speak out, not to squash reasonable debate. That is crucial. But we must empower our students to be proudly and unapologetically Jewish, even when things are difficult. It is why I am so appreciative of an anonymous donor family who has provided me with the funds to bring some of our SPS college students to the APAC Policy Conference this year. If you have a student in college, they've already received a letter about this, but you're sitting here. If you have a student in college and they would like to attend the conference in March in Washington, D.C., please, you or they, reach out to me after the holidays. In thinking about all of these threats, journalist Barry Weiss sadly pointed out the one place the far right and the far left meet is in the hatred of Jews. So how do we gather our strength for the work ahead? To answer this, as it is Rosh HaShanah, we must return to our texts. In our tradition, we have Hillel's famous dictum, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I?" We know that we need to look out for our own. We know we need to put the oxygen mask on our face if we are going to be able to help others on an airplane. And so we must look out for ourselves as Jews and as Zionists. We must protect ourselves, which we are doing, proudly doing. We must be proud of who we are. We must educate about our history. We must be honest with ourselves that maybe even in this great bastion of freedom, we as Jews need to look out for ourselves when people question our rightful place. Barry Weiss continued, there has not been a single moment in Jewish history in which there weren't anti-Semites determined to eradicate Judaism and the Jews. When the Pittsburgh killer shouted, "All Jews must die," he was merely echoing a command uttered in a different tongue by Amalek, the villain that stalked the weakest of the ancient Israelites in the desert, or Haman in our Purim story. But the Jews did not sustain their magnificent civilization because they were anti-Semites. In these trying times, our best strategy is to build without shame a Judaism and a Jewish people and a Jewish state that are not only safe and resilient, but generative, humane, joyful, and life-affirming. A Judaism capable of lighting a fire in every Jewish soul and in the souls of everyone who throws his or her lot with ours. But that doesn't mean closing off from others. Let's think of examples where people from other communities helped us put on those oxygen masks when we need them, when we felt the air being taken out from around us, when we saw people standing up to anti-Semitism to remind us we aren't alone. Last October, over 700 people filled this sanctuary, people of all races, all backgrounds, all religions, all creeds, who came together to fight against the hatred that they saw in Pittsburgh. Caring for ourselves means that if we want people to stand with us, then we must stand with others. Ariel Berger, who wrote Witness Lessons from Elie Wiesel's Classroom, a person who, thanks to the generosity of Irving Sitnick, will be speaking here this May, wrote, "Being a student of Elie Wiesel means knowing that you do not have to choose between your particular identity and your concern for all people. Realizing that you can speak up for your tribe as well as others, that the particular and the universal can and must be mutually reinforcing." This reminds me of two stories where people spoke up on behalf of the Jews, moments that we need to embrace. The first story is from 18 months ago, when I had the honor of representing our synagogue and the New York Jewish community at Vatican City while attending a conference on anti-Semitism with the New York Board of Rabbis. Both Pope Francis, with whom I had the privilege of having an audience, and Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks spoke about this virus of anti-Semitism in our world today. The Pope met with a group of attendees at the Vatican during the morning of the conference, where his emphasis was on the responsibility to remember what had been done in the past and not to fall prey to indifference in the face of hate. As he said, we are responsible when we are able to respond. It is not merely a question of analyzing the causes of violence and refuting their perverse reasoning, but of being actively prepared to respond to them. Thus, the enemy against which we fight is not only hatred in all its forms, but indifference. For it is indifference that paralyzes us and impedes us from doing that which is right. And he raised the point that when we are faced with the virus of indifference, we must administer a vaccine, and that vaccine is memory. And he shared that we had just marked International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Memory is a key to accessing the future, and it is our responsibility to hand it on in a dignified way to young generations. I appreciated that I was invited as a dignitary into the Vatican as a rabbi, freely Jewish, with my kippah, a symbol I spoke about last night, with my kippah on. And the former Italian ambassador commented that he liked the beaded kippah. This was amazing. We know what has come forth from the Vatican in the past. Trust me, they weren't complimenting women rabbis on their kippot. But being a part of that moment gives me hope. But sadly, just because the Pope said it doesn't make it so. As the meeting began, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Italy spoke about the great task at hand of confronting anti-Semitism. As he reminded those in attendance, the wheel of fanaticism can start anywhere, and we must be alarmed when anti-Semitism grows without any reaction. Because, as Elie Wiesel said, silence favors the oppressor, never the victim. He acknowledged that the conference logo had both the Arch of Titus and the menorah, demonstrating that Italy and Europe must acknowledge its painful past of shameful racial laws, often tied back to the Jewish slaves that built the Arch of Titus 2,000 years ago, and the menorah, a symbol of hope as it spreads its light. And with that, a roll call began, a roll call of country after country, from Austria to Macedonia, to the Vatican, to Poland, speaking about how anti-Semitism needs to be eradicated. To listen to country after country share this sentiment was important, but of course it raised questions. Is affirming a stance against anti-Semitism enough? Of course, the answer is no. We need to focus on stories. We need to not only focus on stories where people spoke out against hate, but that they did something about it. This brings me back to World War II, the time of our second story. People often ask, how come non-Jews weren't more righteous during the Holocaust? I actually think the question is, how did some find the strength to be so righteous? There is a story of a professor who studied what happened in a French village. In a time of obscene wickedness, persons of conscience and uncommon courage rescued 5,000 Jews from Nazi persecution. This professor, Professor Halley, was intrigued by this village and these persons, and he decided to ask and research this question. How was it, or why was it, that goodness occurred in this village, and what are the lessons that we can learn? This village is located a great distance from Paris, in the mountainous regions of France, far removed from the hustle and the bustle of everyday life in a large metropolitan area. The leader of this village was a minister named André Trocmé, and the story that Professor Halley tells largely centers around the figure and deeds of this minister. When the Nazis overran France in 1940, the Vichy government, the puppets of the Nazis, was established. On the very first day after the Vichy government rose to power, Pastor Trocmé rose in the pulpit of his church and with all the citizens of his village present, described the creation of cities of refuge, as described in the book of Deuteronomy, where innocent persons can flee from protection from those who would do them harm. He then told his congregants that it was his intention that their village would follow the pattern of the Bible and constitute itself a city of refuge. The villagers were inspired and moved by their pastor, and for weeks and weeks they planned to transform their village. As the word of their intention went forth, and innocent Jews that this village was set to become, and in fact ultimately did become, a city of refuge, 5,000 lives were saved. The people in the town said the pastor reminded them that the tradition had issued 2 commandments that were incumbent upon them to obey. The first, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. And that meant that they were required to follow the laws and the ways of God and imitate the attributes of the divine. And what were those ways? What were those attributes? To love your neighbor as yourself. However, it was a particular episode in this story that we must learn. The wife of the pastor, Magda Trokme, demonstrated that you not only need a city of refuge, but a person of refuge. The village had prepared for some time after the pastor had delivered its sermon on that fateful Sunday in 1940, when it was time to receive the first refugees, the first innocents, lest innocent blood be shed. And one night, the pastor and his wife sat in their home. There was a knock at the door, and the first Jews who sought shelter arrived. It was very late, and suddenly everyone in the room froze because a Rubicon was about to be crossed. It was one thing to talk about virtue. It's another thing to commit the act. There was complete silence in the room. Everyone was immobilized with the weight of the deed they were about to perform. However, at that moment, when time stood still and no one else moved, Magda Trokme arose and calmly opened the door. She saw a father and a mother and a little baby. With a calm smile of greeting on her face, she said, "You must be tired. You must be hungry. We have a bed. We have food. Come in." At that moment, Magda Trokme, with such simple words, transformed herself into a person of refuge. This story is not only meaningful, it is crucial. As we tell the stories of those who hate us, we must tell the stories of those who helped us. And these stories are a lesson for us, not just to be appreciative of what others have done for us, but to ensure that we are these people for others as well. To the second part of Hillel's statement, if I am only for myself, what am I? For Elie Wiesel had the ability to look out at the world's chaos and say, and yet. Meaning that we could look at our situation and the need to defend ourselves and have empathy for others. Wiesel would say not all victims were Jews, but all Jews were victims. And it was this, in fact, the particularity of the Holocaust that led Wiesel to his universal commitments. Berger writes, at the heart of Elie Wiesel's mission as a teacher was a phrase his students heard him repeat time and time again: listening to a witness makes you a witness. Like propaganda, its evil twin, moral education is contagious. And to be effective, it must be contagious. Unlike propaganda, though, which tells people what they want to hear or feeds their existing fears, moral education tells people what they need to hear, even when it is painful. Here is how you can tell the difference between false prophets and true prophets. The former comfort, the latter disturb. When moral education works, students investigate and embrace new ways of thinking. They are no longer able to pass a homeless person on a street without offering at least a smile. They speak up when they overhear a bigoted word or see a bully. And so Wiesel was one of the proudest Zionists there was, criticized by people on his far left, on the far left, for his faith in Zionism. He affirmed it all the time, including in op-eds in the New York Times. He would say we need to take care of ourselves and protect, and yet, that does not give us the permission to be silent in the face of the hate of others. It is why he spoke out against genocide in our world, regardless of who the victims were. How do we begin to understand what others are feeling? How do we understand their pain without being concerned that people will say we are rejecting our own? How do we hold pain simultaneously, recognizing that the depths of pain is not a contest? This past summer, I spent time at the Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C. I saw artifacts that reminded me how easily people made blacks subhuman. We know that in our own experience as Jews, this happened to us. A visit with the Women's League recently to the Auschwitz exhibit downtown demonstrates that. But have we ever thought about our founding documents as Americans? The notion that our founding fathers were fighting for their own freedom while simultaneously not seeing the full humanity of others? In the first floor of the museum, the visitors enter a hall called the Paradox of Freedom, a reminder that freedom was, in a sense, founded on the backs of those who were considered only 3/5 human. This was a humbling experience for me. I walked through the hall as a white person, knowing that some people might only see me as that. But I held the pain of my people who would experience subjugation as well. But I had to say to myself, this isn't about me as a victim right now. I need to be able to walk through this museum and learn about somebody else's pain. And I felt that pain when an African American young girl pointed to our founding documents and turned to her mom and said, "Mom, they really thought of us like that?" Yes, they did, and many do. They look at the other, fill in the blank who the other is, and that person becomes subhuman. The ability to do this is what allows people to go into houses of worship, schools, movie theaters, shopping malls, concerts, and kill people. If you see people as subhuman, if you see people as other, you can do that. But that is, of course, not what we as a Jewish community stand for. We see ourselves and others as human. We will remember that we were all created in God's image. We think about the messages of the high holidays, where we celebrate the creation of humanity, not the specific creation of the Jewish people. That's Passover. And we speak up and speak out. The final phrase of Hillel's statement is, if not now, when? This means that we need to be able to call out hatred of ourselves and others when it happens, not in hindsight, not when we're comfortable, but now. We need to speak up for Jews slaughtered in their sanctuaries. We need to speak up for immigrants murdered in a Walmart. We must look out for ourselves because we are a part of these stories. Elie Wiesel said, "To be human is to share a common origin." And if we share a common origin, our destinies are intertwined. What happens to me will eventually happen to you. What happened to my people is a foreshadowing of what will threaten the world. Therefore, the most biblical commandment is lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You must not stand idly by the shedding of the blood of your neighbor, re'echa, your fellow human being, for it is universal. Anyone who is suffering, anyone who is threatened becomes your responsibility. If you can feel this and act with a little more humanity, more sensitivity, as a result, we will see this is just the beginning. It is not the end. I don't know how to end hatred, but recognizing our shared humanity is a good beginning. And so in this new year, what do? We need to speak up for ourselves. We need to be proudly Jewish. We need to speak out for others and believe in hope, for that's all we can do. Shana Tova. May you have a happy and a healthy new year.